Welcome to Just Unjust with your host, Cassie Bordeaux, bringing you the voices of the unheard.
Hello and welcome to Just Unjust, a podcast profiling stories of injustice from around the United States. Today's episode features the case of Anthony Sanchez, a man who currently sits on Oklahoma's death row with a scheduled execution date of September 21st, 2023, for the 1996 brutal rape and murder of 21-year-old Juli Busken. Since he was first charged, Anthony has always maintained his innocence, and in recent months, new evidence has been uncovered that raises serious questions about Anthony's actual guilt and is causing an increasing number of people to wonder if the state of Oklahoma is about to execute an innocent man. In the early morning hours of December 20th, 1996, in Norman, Oklahoma, 21-year-old Juli Busken was arriving home to her apartment after dropping a friend off at the airport. Neighbors reported that they heard a woman scream in the parking lot, and two different eyewitnesses say they saw an older-looking man driving Juli's car away from the apartment complex with a terrified-looking Juli Busken in the passenger seat. Later that evening, the body of Juli Busken was discovered at the water's edge of a nearby lake, shot in the back of her head execution style, with her hands and her feet bound with shoelaces. Items recovered from the crime scene included articles of clothing, some of which had what was believed to be semen stains, along with hair samples and 49 fingerprints. Eyewitnesses who saw the perpetrator and Juli driving toward the lake before she was killed gave information to produce a very detailed sketch of both Juli and the perpetrator, who they stated appeared to be much older than Juli, but no suspects were found and the case went cold. Nearly 7 years later, Anthony Sanchez, who had been a baby-faced teenager at the time of Juli Busken's murder, was arrested for breaking into his own house and, as was required, submitted his DNA to police, who then uploaded it into their DNA data system called CODIS. After submitting Anthony's DNA into the CODIS system, it was found that the DNA Anthony Sanchez had submitted was a partial match for the DNA mixture that was collected from the crime, and Anthony was charged in the cold case killing of Juli Busken. However, neither the hair nor any of the 49 fingerprints collected from the crime scene matched Anthony, and although the state claimed that Anthony's shoe print was found at the scene, it was later determined that the shoe print at the crime scene was a size 9 and Anthony wore a size 11. Recent investigation of Anthony's case has revealed that the DNA mixture collected from the crime scene that was so instrumental in Anthony's conviction and death sentence had been processed and analyzed by an Oklahoma City crime lab who had a long history of DNA contamination, fabrication, and falsification that resulted in so many wrongful convictions of innocent people, some of whom had been sent to death row and later exonerated, that the supervisor of the lab, Joyce Gilchrist, was ultimately fired for misconduct, although not before she oversaw the DNA analysis in Juli Busken's murder. Although the state of Oklahoma claimed that Anthony was a 100% match in the CODIS hit, at trial, one of the main DNA analysts from the crime lab admitted that Anthony had in fact never been a 100% match, but that she felt it was close enough, so she filled in the missing pieces. She essentially created a 100% match that never existed in reality, and this fabrication of evidence is what sent Anthony Sanchez to death row, where he currently awaits an execution less than 8 weeks away. Anthony Sanchez has always maintained that he is innocent of this crime, and now new evidence has been brought forth that may point to another person, Anthony's father, Glenn Sanchez, who had a long history of violence, particularly violence against women, and who obviously also shares DNA with his son, Anthony. Over just the last few months, a newly hired private investigator, David Ballard, has uncovered information that brings up serious questions about Anthony's actual guilt and the state's handling of the evidence used to convict Anthony in the first place, including the DNA the state claimed to match Anthony, and the fact that Anthony's own father confessed to the crime that Anthony is about to die for. This is Just Unjust. I was first made aware of Anthony's case in May of 2023, after having been contacted by Anthony's spiritual advisor, Rev Dr Jeff Hood, who is also one of the leaders of the campaign to free Anthony Sanchez and find the true killer of Juli Busken. Here is Jeff describing when he first met Anthony and what he thought when Anthony had first told him he was innocent of this crime.
I met Anthony Sanchez back in September of last year. And my interactions with Anthony began based on the fact that he had an April 9th execution date. Anthony, from the very beginning, told me that he was innocent. I listened to all of that, and to be honest, I kind of dismissed it and just kind of said, okay, well, that's what everybody says. Well, the more I got to know him, the more I realized just how ardent he was in this innocence claim. I mean, that's what he wanted to talk about. You know, I would talk about the weather or sports or something else, but he wanted to talk about the innocence claim. So finally I said, okay, let me check out the case. And I began to look into the evidence. And this is an awful case. I mean, Juli Busken was incredibly talented, beautiful, not just physically, but in all sorts of spiritually and emotionally, you know, just an incredibly mature, amazing person for a 22-year-old. And the fact that she was snatched from her parking lot, apartment complex parking lot, raped, murdered, it's horrible.
I asked Jeff what stood out to him in Anthony's case that gave him pause and caused him to consider that Anthony's claim of innocence may in fact be the truth. And he had this to say.
The first thing that stuck out to me that really kind of made me go deeper was that sketch. Two witnesses with a sketch artist created this sketch. The two witnesses had seen Juli Busken, the victim in this case, with the perpetrator before she was killed. And they described the perpetrator as being an older man. The sketch looks like an older man, very distinct features. The more I looked at that sketch and the more I thought about it, I just said to myself, you know, this isn't Anthony. Like, I don't know who this is. I don't know what this means, but this isn't Anthony.
Jeff told me the more he looked into Anthony's case, the more he realized that Anthony needed a professional investigator.
I partnered with Death Penalty Action and a number of other activist friends, and we raised $10,000 to hire a private investigator. And the private investigator went to work there in Oklahoma. His name is David Ballard. He's kind of a good old boy from Oklahoma. We thought it was important to get someone who we felt like understood Oklahoma and could understand the ins and outs of this case.
David Ballard is a licensed private investigator in Oklahoma who often works cases for the state, both as an investigator and as an expert witness. And his specialty is everything related to violent crime, which made him a perfect fit to investigate this case. Here is David talking about some of his initial findings after he began to research the case.
When you look at this sketch, especially compared to Anthony Sanchez at that time, it's not even, in my opinion, close. It matches somebody older and with more distinct features. One of the eyewitnesses was so vivid about what she recalled. That's how they knew that law enforcement investigators knew that she was on something, because she was able to describe Juli Busken's clothing, car, and things in great detail. So when you're trying to figure out a suspect and you're doing a sketch, that witness was spot on about what she saw. So it makes sense that her recall of the person as they're doing the sketch is most likely going to be vivid as well.
Aside from the sketch that so obviously isn't Anthony, other evidence in this case didn't match Anthony either, such as the shoe print found at the crime scene and the hair and skin fragments that were found inside Juli Busken's car.
There was a shoe print that was found at the scene, and then it was stated that it matched potentially a shoe print of a style and type of shoe that Anthony Sanchez may have owned at one time. However, you're talking about a mass-produced shoe, and even if you go with that and say that yes, Anthony could have owned this type of shoe, the problem is that it was a size 9 shoe, and Anthony Sanchez, even at the time when he was just 9 months past being 18 years old, that didn't match his shoe size at that time anyway. You have trace evidence and biological evidence. Hairs found inside the vehicle did not match Anthony Sanchez. There was epithelial cells that were found, did not match Anthony Sanchez. So basically what was found in the car, none of that evidence even goes to Anthony Sanchez in no way. He found, I believe, 49 sets of fingerprints, inside the car, which they were compared against Anthony Sanchez. None of them were a match. I understand that people could assume cold weather or, if they're committing crimes, maybe they're wearing gloves. But the fact you have 49 sets on, and keep in mind, Juli was bound behind her back with shoelaces. So time with gloves on might have been an issue. At some point, someone could have taken gloves off because there's a lot of prints, but none of them matched to Anthony Sanchez.
The state claimed that DNA evidence found on a leotard near the crime scene was a 100% match to Anthony Sanchez and was used as the primary evidence against him. Here is David Ballard again explaining why the supposed 100% DNA match is simply not possible.
At the time, DNA was really new to crime scene investigations and being used in courts. So with that being said, early on, they only got very small amounts, and you have mixed DNA. Mixed DNA is impossible to get a full profile from. The only way you get a clean profile is from a clean swab directly from the source. In one of the court records, the technician was asked, and it ultimately came out that they didn't get a full profile, but that the person felt like, based off their training knowledge, that there was enough, and that's why we probably have the issue with, based on the one report, Juli Busken shows to be a potential relative to Anthony Sanchez and another suspect, actually two other people. And so, that's why we looked at, was it a contamination deal? Was it something different? But that's based off of a DNA profile that was taken from her blood. So there shouldn't be any matching numbers to Anthony or anyone else. That should be very distinct to her. Just pieces like that make it an issue. And, it calls for either further testing and investigation rather than trying to say that it now somehow produced a full profile when, in a lot of ways, the technology wasn't even there at the time to do that. Based off training and all the work I've done with DNA and on cases, it is considered scientifically and physically impossible to have reached that based off what they had to work with.
The lab that tested this DNA from the start was where Joyce Gilchrist worked, who Joyce Gilchrist was, infamous, was on 60 Minutes and a number of other news programs, infamous for manipulating DNA in Oklahoma City and wider Oklahoma cases. DNA analyst by the name of Melissa Keith, who in 2004 claims to get this match. Well, she even in trial testimony said that she knew it was a match, and so she filled in the blanks, meaning that she felt like it was close enough and that there was enough auxiliary evidence to where this must be the guy. And multiple forms of testing that she claimed that she did in 2004 were not even available until 2007.
As part of their case against Anthony, the state claimed that Anthony lived in the city of Norman, where the crime occurred, and that he lived nearby the crime scene. This, however, was another twisted truth by the state. Anthony had at one time lived in Norman, but that was years before the murder of Juli Busken. At the time of the murder, Anthony was living in another town called Moore and was a student at Moore High School. Here is Anthony Sanchez in his own words describing where he actually lived at the time of the murder and what his thoughts were when he was first charged for the cold case murder of Juli Busken.
They made it sound like I lived there in December of '96 when Juli Busken was murdered and kidnapped. And that's not true. I lived in another town. I lived on West Franklin Road in Moore, Oklahoma in December 1996 and went to Moore High School. I did not live on Drake Drive in Norman, Oklahoma, like they said. And it wasn't a mile from where Juli Busken was kidnapped from. I did not hear of her murder in '96. I was a young kid. I wasn't interested in the news and happening that's going on. I was more interested in going to play football or going to play baseball, stuff like that. I didn't know about it until they arrested me. And
So what were your thoughts when, they come to you and you're serving time for burglary and they're like, hey, guess what? You're being indicted on murder charges because your DNA matched. I mean, what was going through your head when that happened?
man, that was like the most weirdest thing in the world. Cause I was like, no way. Y'all gotta say something. Y'all gotta redo that. Cause it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's like they're like making a story to fit their puzzle pieces, but that's not true. So it's it was kind of a weird feeling, to tell you the truth, when they said, we're charging you with murder. Because they brought me here to Oklahoma State Penitentiary before they ever told me I was being charged for murder. I was at Lawton Correctional Facility, and they pulled me from there and told me, we're shipping you out to High Max. And they would not tell me why. They had 2 officers come to Lawton before the DNA ever came back. And then that's when they hit me with all of this other stuff. And I'm like, whoa, hey, slow down. And it's mind-boggling because at the end of the day, I did not kill Juli Busken. The facts of the case are incredibly disturbing. I mean, it seems like they just keep putting words in my mouth to help their cause. I am an innocent man, and here's how to prove it. There are 49 fingerprints. To this day, no one knows who they belong to, but for sure, not mine. The eyewitness, Janice K. Merriman, drew a sketch of the victim and the killer herself. Merriman drew the victim spot on. Miss Merriman drew the killer, and he looked nothing like me. It looked like a much older man. I had just turned 18 before the murder. And if you look at State's Exhibit 88, it's the killer's footprint with a tape measure next to it. And if you take my bare foot with no sock, no shoe, and put it on the acetate paper, my foot completely engulfed the State's Exhibit 88, proving that I cannot be the killer. If you look at the medical examiner's report, you can tell it was a left-handed shooter. The entrance is to the lower left side of the head. The bullet graph shows the bullet going from upper left to the right. This proves the shooter was left-handed, and that I couldn't be the shooter. I'm right-handed. Doctor shows no signs of any brutal rape of any kind whatsoever. No murder weapon has ever been found or linked to me. I had hair to the middle of my back. Not one of my hairs were found. My hair was everywhere except for that crime scene. No one ever looked at my cell phone records to compare to the State's Exhibit 141, and no one called my ex-girlfriend to testify. I feel sorry for Juli Busken's family. I know Juli Busken was cherished by her family and friends, and my heart goes out to the entire community who knew Juli Busken as a friend of family. But the fact of the matter is, I am innocent. I did not kill Juli Busken.
Given the facts of Anthony's case, I was just so confused on how he could have been convicted and sentenced to death for this crime. The fingerprints didn't match, the shoe print didn't match, the hair sample didn't match. The only thing that had a partial match to Anthony was a supposed partial DNA match that came out of a crime lab that was notorious for lying, making their claims simply fruit of the poisonous tree. I asked Jeff, given the facts of Anthony's case, how on earth did Anthony get convicted?
As far as Norman, Oklahoma goes, this is the trial of the century. I mean, it was a huge, huge case. And, I think that, I think in such a sensational moment, in such a sensational case, you should have defense attorneys that are up to the task. Well, Anthony's defense attorneys were scared of him. I mean, Anthony was shackled the entire trial. And so every time he moved, he's at a glass table. Every time he moved, it sounded like the monster was about to get let loose. And so, you have these attorneys who are being told, your client's a crazed killer, he's unrestrained and blah. So, I guess I'm just trying to say everybody was prejudiced against him before the trial ever came about, including his own attorneys. And so they saw it as their job to try to keep him from getting the death penalty. And so they made it kind of their mission to keep him from getting the death penalty. Well, in my mind, the best way to keep someone from getting the death penalty is to prove that they didn't commit a crime. And they never did that. At the trial, after the verdict comes down, you probably saw this, Anthony Sanchez turns around to Juli Busken's parents and says, "Mr. and Mrs. Busken, I did not kill your daughter. I swear to God, I did not kill your daughter." And when that happened, he is dragged out of the courtroom by his hands and his feet. And there are these famous pictures of in the in newspaper media of him being dragged out of the courtroom after saying that. And I realize that people say all sorts of things, in court and after court or whatever, but that has always been an incredibly powerful moment for me to think about. And I've always thought, was there not just somebody in the courtroom who said, wow, he's showing a whole lot more passion than his defense attorneys are, that he didn't do this, and kind of ask any sort of questions. But the problem is, like it was back then, is defense attorneys didn't really know what DNA was at the time. I mean, you have these defense attorneys that are by no means experts on DNA. Then you've got an analyst in Melissa Keys sitting on the stand saying, this is a 1 in 1 trillion match. Well, hell, when I hear that, I'm going, damn, that sounds like a match. And but what she didn't say, or what perhaps she said but didn't get heard, was the fact that it was a little bit more complicated than that. It was a little bit more nuanced than that. And her, the way that she got this was more complicated than that. And of course, the state comes out a couple months ago and says, we know for sure that it was Anthony, blah, blah, blah. They're testing against reports. They're not testing against the original DNA.
As if this case wasn't already crazy enough, last year, a shocking new twist occurred in the case, and that was the confession to Juli Busken's murder by Anthony's father, Glenn Sanchez. Here is Private Investigator David Ballard speaking on that confession.
He confessed to killing Juli Busken as late as last year, prior to committing suicide. Glenn had a history of violence towards women. When you're doing cases, one of the things you look at is propensity and prior behaviors and that the buildup. And when you don't see that with Anthony, you do see that with Glenn. Interviews that were done with ex-wives and family, that Glenn was very violent. He struggled with alcohol addiction along with opioid addictions. He was known to become very enraged when he didn't get his way or things were not going right. Bizarre sexual behaviors towards women. And then when you look at the sketch comparison, it's almost a 100% match to Glenn. Again, I can't say always 100%, but it looks a lot more like Glenn, especially at the time. Then you have the fact that when Glenn was interviewed by law enforcement, he references Stanley Draper and going to Stanley Draper to fish. And the detective in the report states that it was right next to where they found Juli's body. Then one of the other factors are, when you get back to the DNA, obviously Glenn is Anthony's dad, so there's going to be matches, but the matches should not be as complete as they are on some of the loci. But again, we don't know, when we're looking at these profiles, how well built they are. We've done independent testing and that to try to find out, and Glenn is over a 50% match to Anthony. A father can be, around a 50%, but over is pretty rare, if ever. And one of the things when they do DNA reports, even to this day, when they do a finding, they'll say outside of a direct relative. The likelihood of this person being a match to a random person is, now the numbers are really up there because of the way testing is done. But back then, a random person and a suspect having close matches was even unheard of. So when you get in looking at Juli Busken's DNA, Anthony's DNA, Glenn Sanchez's DNA, there's a lot of matching that shouldn't be there because Juli's not a relative. So there's a lot of things that point at Glenn. Also, the shoe print. Anthony was a size, I believe, 10 at the time. This was a size 9. Anthony was over 6 foot tall. Glenn was 5'9". We don't have it yet to know his exact shoe size, but he was a lot smaller, had a lot smaller foot, and was even reported that when he would travel between Midwest City to Norman, he always took the back ways around and he always went to the Stanley Draper. So much so that his family, even after his death, talked about his favorite pier at Stanley Draper to go to, which is not very far from where they found Juli Busken. And that's not even the area he went fishing. The area he talked about going fishing was off a side road and went over by a dam. So he knows the area. He's got a propensity to violence. He confessed to it. And like we said, I get it that it could be, oh yeah, that's convenient that he confessed and then commits suicide and, is a relative. I see that, but there's a lot more points that go back to Glenn Sanchez, or more likely to Glenn Sanchez, than there are even close to Anthony Sanchez.
The boldest thing that I can say right now is look at the sketch. These are the two people who said that they saw Juli Busken with the perpetrator minutes before she would have been killed. And that sketch is not Anthony Sanchez. We know that there was hair found in her car, and we know that that hair doesn't match Anthony Sanchez. We know that there are skin fragments found in the car, and we know that that doesn't match Anthony Sanchez. There just simply is too much evidence that this wasn't Anthony to proceed with an execution. There's too many questions to proceed with an execution. And all of these questions are here because people tried to cut corners. He's never been given the benefit of a full investigation.
Anthony recently decided to forego an opportunity to go before the Board of Pardon and Parole and ask for clemency, a move that many people do not understand. Here's Rev Dr Jeff Hood explaining Anthony's decision to turn down a chance at clemency.
One of the things that he consistently says is that he would rather die standing for his innocence than die begging on his knees for mercy. And that's what, the campaign for Anthony Sanchez is all about. It is about believing that we want justice. We want justice for an innocent man. We don't want mercy for an innocent man. We want justice for an innocent man. See, because mercy is something that seems to accompany guilt. I mean, when you go before the clemency board and you say, please, don't kill me. I'm sorry for what I did, this and that. Well, that's not Anthony's situation. Anthony hasn't done anything. So to ask him to apologize for something that he hasn't done is absurd. Which is why, again, we are fighting for justice for an innocent man. We're not in need of anybody's mercy. We are in need of justice. And I think it's absolutely disgusting that instead of, hearing his evidence and engaging his evidence, people want to make a spectacle of him and a spectacle of his, begging for his life. And it's like, man, what kind of sadistic society must we be? That if he's not willing to play our game of going before the television cameras and begging for his life, then there must be something wrong with him. It's not what's wrong with him, it's what's wrong with us. The fact that we care more about someone playing our games than we do about engaging their evidence and helping prove their innocence, or engaging questions of innocence, engaging questions of doubt. We would rather force them to push through and act within our spectacle is just disgusting. And the clemency process in and of itself is disgusting, because what ends up happening is you go in and the state creates a monster, turns you into a monster, and then you're supposed to apologize for being a monster and what you did. And you're not going to get clemency if you don't sit there and say, I'm so sorry for being a monster. Well, it seems to me that if you make an innocent man confess to something that he didn't do, and beg for forgiveness for something that he didn't do seems to me like we're the monsters. If that's the process we're going to force somebody to go through when they believe that they're innocent. I mean, and I think that that's another part of this that's important. We don't believe that Anthony is innocent. We know that Anthony is innocent. I want to make it clear that it's not just that I think that Anthony has become a great friend. It's not just that I think he's an incredibly moral and thoughtful person. It's that I don't think that Oklahoma has seen this level of courage with regards to someone on death row before. And I think that in the midst of showing this courage, Anthony is not just creating a new way for himself, he's creating a new way for everybody down there. I mean, he's telling the clemency board, I'm not buying what you're selling. And by doing that, he has forced the clemency board to come out and defend the fairness of their process. I've worked on a lot of cases over the years, and I've had a lot of questions about different cases. And there's no doubt in my mind that Anthony Sanchez did not kill Juli Busken. Now, from there, certainly the questions begin to blossom. Who did kill Juli Busken? Who did the witness see? Who's in that sketch? Whose fingerprints are in that car? Whose skin cells, hair samples, where is all this stuff coming from? Well, we shouldn't have to answer all of those questions in order to answer the main question, and that is, did Anthony Sanchez kill Juli Busken? And I think the evidence is very clear that he did not.
In a society that strives to achieve the highest standards of justice, it is essential to critically examine the practice of executing individuals when there is any question about their guilt. We cannot turn a blind eye to the fact that our justice system is not infallible. Numerous cases of exonerations through DNA evidence have revealed the alarming reality that wrongful convictions do happen, somewhat regularly, and that executions have occurred in circumstances where innocence was eventually proven, but too late, thereby creating another victim, this time with society taking that innocent life. These cases serve as a poignant reminder that the justice system is not immune to error. Therefore, when we elect to impose the ultimate act of punishment, there must not be a rush to execute when there is even the slightest chance of an issue, be that mitigating circumstances, or in many cases, such as this one, questioning the matter of guilt at all. Society's pursuit of justice should prioritize the truth above all else. When doubts about guilt exist, it is imperative to allow the opportunity for further investigation and the presentation of new evidence. Rushing to execute someone in the face of unresolved doubt risks perpetuating a miscarriage of justice, suppressing the truth, and mocks the very principles upon which our society claims to stand: equality, fairness, and human dignity. Postponing executions allows for a thorough reevaluation of the case, ensuring that truth prevails and justice is truly served. The life of a single innocent person is worth more than any notion of finality or vengeance, and we should not allow the machinery of death to move forward when there is even the slightest possibility of innocence. It is incumbent upon us to ensure that the justice system operates fairly and that every person's right to due process is upheld. Anthony Sanchez's life hangs in the balance, and we cannot turn a blind eye to the profound implications of his case. As citizens, we must not stand idly by when a life is at stake, especially when there are legitimate concerns about the accuracy of the verdict. The strength of our justice system lies in its ability to correct mistakes and uphold the principles of fairness and due process. Just a few months ago, the execution of Richard Glossop, a white man on Oklahoma's death row, was postponed yet again, and supporters of Anthony Sanchez are asking for the same treatment for Anthony Sanchez, a member of the Choctaw Nation. A postponement so that new evidence that has been uncovered can be examined and a thorough investigation of his case can finally be performed to ensure that the state is not executing an innocent person. Anthony's support team is imploring the state of Oklahoma to halt Anthony's execution, currently scheduled for September 21st, 2023, so that Anthony's case can finally be given the thorough investigation it never received. And so we are not left to wonder if the state of Oklahoma executed an innocent person. To learn more about Anthony's case and ways you can get involved, please visit his website, www.freeanthonysanchez.org. Sign the petition that is listed on his website, call, email, and write the Oklahoma Attorney General's Office, the Oklahoma State Representatives, and the Oklahoma Governor, and tell them to halt the execution of Anthony Sanchez and reinvestigate the case. This is Just Unjust, and I'm your host, Cassie Bordeaux.